Good morning and afternoon, everyone, wherever you may be joining us from. I'll take a few seconds while people are still joining to introduce myself. My name is Julia Perry, and I'm a consultant for the tobacco control team at the Pan American Health Organization. I'd like to welcome you this year's webinar, Tobacco, a Threat to Our Planet, held to commemorate World No Tobacco Day, which falls on May 31st every single year. So this year, the theme was Poisoning Our Planet, and it aims to bring to light the harmful impact tobacco has on the environment through its life cycle, as well as greenwashing strategies used by the tobacco industry to try to deceive the public on the real impact of tobacco on our planet. Now that we're all here, I'd like to begin by going over some quick housekeeping messages. First and foremost, I'd like to remind you that this session is currently being recorded. We also have simultaneous interpretation available in 2 languages today, English and Spanish. The button will be on the bottom of your screen. If you're having difficulties seeing the icon or getting it to work properly, we recommend just updating your device's version of Zoom for future webinars. I'd like to quickly go over the agenda, as we do only have a short webinar today. After our opening remarks, we're gonna look at the theme overview for World No Tobacco this year and dive into the awards for World No Tobacco Day this year, which are very exciting. We have 2 panelists, specialists on board that will be talking about topics that are specifically relevant to this year's theme. And then we will wrap up and have some closing remarks, and it will be an information-packed hour. So next, I'd like to present Dr. Anselm Hennis, actually, Director of the Noncommunicable Diseases and Mental Health Department at PAHO, to share a few opening words with us. So Dr. Hennis, thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Julia. So good day to all and welcome to our webinar, Tobacco, a Threat to the Planet. This year's World No Tobacco Day aims to emphasize the harmful impact of the tobacco industry on the environment. Every year, tobacco kills over 8 million people and leads to economic losses to the tune of $1.4 trillion. But besides these troubling figures, tobacco adds unnecessary pressure to our planet's already scarce resources and fragile ecosystems. The negative impact of tobacco extends from its cultivation through its production, distribution, consumption to the post-consumption waste. This year's World No Tobacco Day theme highlights the negative environmental impact of tobacco and provides an additional reason to quit tobacco use. While we are aware that tobacco products kill half of the users who consume it as intended, the tobacco industry, through its use of greenwashing strategies, seeks to portray itself as being ecologically responsible in the production of its lethal products. The tobacco industry contributes to climate change through the offloading of greenhouse gases equivalent to 84 megatons of carbon dioxide each year, apart from the destruction of approximately 3.5 million hectares of land used for growing tobacco, polluting the oceans and harming marine life. Furthermore, tobacco cultivation causes soil depletion, adding to food insecurity and nutrition challenges. In our region, Brazil and Cuba are facing desertification attributable to tobacco farming. While such adverse impacts on the environment are even more evident in low-income countries, profits go to transnational tobacco companies that are based in high-income countries. Today's webinar will present information about how tobacco affects the environment, as well as strategies and measures for control. Our panel of experts will highlight important perspectives, including the greenwashing strategies practiced by the industry and the cost to countries associated with tobacco waste. Tobacco consumption is the main risk factor for the 4 major non-communicable diseases, namely cardiovascular diseases, cancer, diabetes, and chronic respiratory disease. And it also contributes to air pollution, which is also a preventable risk factor for non-communicable diseases. The full implementation of the World Health Organization Framework Convention on Tobacco Control will not only protect the health of our populations, but will also protect the environment for future generations. I would like to take the opportunity to recognize some of the important advances in our region in the implementation of the treaty. To date, 24 countries have adopted policies establishing smoke-free environments. In December 2020, South America became the first multi-nation continent to become 100% smoke-free in public places. 22 countries have implemented large graphic health warnings in cigarette packs, and the region of the Americas is on track to achieve the Global Action Plan target of a 30% reduction in tobacco consumption by 2025. Nonetheless, there's still much to be done to advance other demand reduction measures, such as price and tax measures, bans on advertising, promotion, and sponsorship, including regulating new tobacco and nicotine products, which will also protect the environment. And we must recognize that electronic waste is also adding to the plastic waste polluting the environment. Thank you for your participation in today's event, and I look forward to thought-provoking discussions and guidance on how we scale up our efforts to motivate people to quit tobacco use and also protect the environment. Welcome to each of you.
Thank you, Dr. Hennis. Once again, thanks again for joining us for this webinar and for opening the floor and setting the stage for discussion on this extremely important topic. Next, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Adriana Bacelar. Adriana is the Tobacco Surveillance Specialist for the Tobacco Control Team at PAHO. So Adriana, please go ahead.
Thank you, Julia. I'm going to first present the video of this year campaign. So bear with me.
Come and see. I need to show you something. A product that is destroying our planet. To make space for it, millions of trees are cut down. To grow it, chemicals poison the land, the soil, the water. To produce it, the air becomes saturated with toxins. And when it's discarded, our environment is polluted in ways that we can't afford. Tobacco costs us more than 8 million lives every year. It also costs us 600 million trees, 200,000 hectares of land, 84 million tons of CO2, 22 billion tons of water. Tobacco is not only poisoning people, it's poisoning our planet.
And now I'm going to switch to Spanish to do the presentation of the World No Tobacco Day team. Bien. Otra vez, buenos días y buenas tardes con todos y
Once
todos.
again, thank you, or good afternoon. Adriana Barcelas, Specialist for Tobacco Surveillance for the Regional Tobacco Control Team at PAHO. And on this World No Tobacco Day that is celebrated every day on May 31st, it was a day set by WHO back in 1887 with the purpose of calling attention worldwide on the tobacco use pandemic and impact. Celebrating this day enables us to highlight specific messages that have to do with tobacco control and encourage the observance of the UN Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. Today's theme, as we said, is tobacco poisoning our planet. The purpose of today's campaign are to make the public aware on the impact of tobacco on the environment, as well as all the tobacco production chain from cultivation to post-consumption waste, and to give tobacco consumers another reason to give up smoking, as well as to talk about the strategies and efforts by the tobacco industry to greenwash its reputation and present their products as environmentally friendly. The impact of tobacco on people's health are widely known. Every year, tobacco kills 8 million people around the world, be it through direct use or exposure to secondhand smoke, and a third of those deaths occur in the region of the Americas. Over the last decade, I'm sorry, Adriana, we cannot see your presentation. Oh,
Claro, perdón, perdón.
No hay problema.
Entonces, solamente para... Gracias, Rosa, por avisar.
thank you, Rosa, for letting me know.
¿Ahora ven la presentación?
Can you see the presentation
Ahora
now?
sí, perfecto.
Now we
Perfecto.
can,
Entonces,
perfect.
solamente pasando aquí los slides.
Okay, so I'm going to show you slides.
El tema del Día Mundial.
So this is
los
this
objetivos,
year's
que
theme,
como dice,
the
sensibilizar
objectives,
el
like I
público de
said,
los
to
impactos
make
del tabaco
public
en el ambiente,
awareness on the
darle a los
impact of
consumidores una
tobacco in the
razón más clara
environment
para
and
fumar y
give
exponer
consumers an
los
additional
esfuerzos de la
reason
industria
to quit
tabacalera
smoking and
privativar o
expose the
ecobalancear
efforts
todos
by
estos
the tobacco
resultados
industry
a través
for
de
greenwashing
estrategias de
its
greenwashing.
reputation through
Y ahí
these
comenzaba
greenwashing
hablando
strategies. And
sobre
as I was
la
saying,
epidemia de tabaquismo. Y aquí
tobacco
tenemos,
consume is an epidemic
conocemos los efectos
since
en la
we
salud y
know
también
about the impact
en las
on
últimas dos
health,
décadas
and
varios
over the
estudios
past few
demuestran el
decades, a
impacto
lot
del
of
tabaco
studies
sobre la
have shown
economía y
the
ahora
impact
estamos
tobacco has
teniendo
on the economy.
oportunidad
And
de
now we're
conocer una
having an
otra dimensión
opportunity
de los
to
efectos
get
nocivos
to
del
know
tabaco que
about another
también
dimension
inciden en la
of
salud
tobacco
y en la
impact
economía,
that
que
also
son las consecuencias
affects
para el medio
the
ambiente.
economy and health, which
En
are
todo el ciclo
the
de vida del
impact on the
tabaco
environment.
empieza desde el
Throughout the
cultivo de las
tobacco
hojas de
life
tabaco
cycle that
hasta
begins with
el desecho de los
cultivation all
productos
the way
después de
through
consumido, se generan problemas
post-consumption waste, a lot
ambientales.
of environmental
En su cultivo,
issues
los
occur.
problemas están
During
relacionados con
cultivation,
el
the
uso de
issues have to
tierra,
do with
el
the
agua,
use
el
of
uso de
land, water,
plaguicidas y la deforestación.
pesticides, and
En la siguiente
deforestation.
etapa, que es el
In the
curado
next
del
stage, which
tabaco,
is
el
curing
impacto es
tobacco,
la
the
contribución a la
impact is
deforestación para la
contribution to
obtención de la madera
deforestation
para curar las
in
hojas de
order to
tabaco,
obtain good, in order
tanto en
to
la
curate
fabricación como
tobacco
en el
leaves,
transporte
both
y
during the
distribución de los
manufacturing as well as
productos.
transportation and
Son
distribution
generados
of
gases de
products.
efecto invernadero que se emiten
GHGs
a la
are produced,
atmósfera
which
y
are
también
sent to the
residuos de
atmosphere
fabricación.
as well as
En el
manufacturing
consumo,
waste.
los
During
residuos
consumption,
tóxicos del humo de tabaco son
toxic
liberados
waste
en el
from
ambiente
tobacco
y
smoke are
muchos de estos
released
residuos
into the area,
persisten
and a
por
lot of
largos
these
periodos.
waste
Y
persist
por
for a very
fin,
long
en el
time. And
postconsumo
finally,
tenemos
during the
las colillas
post-consumption
que son
stage, we have
altamente
the cigarette
contaminantes,
butts, which
tenidas
are
los desechos de
highly
los
pollutants.
paquetes
We
que
also
son de
have
plástico y
the
de cartón
cigarette
y el humo residual
packages, which have
que
carton
contamina el medio
and plastic,
ambiente.
and the
En esta
residual
diapositiva
smoke that
están algunos de los
contaminates and
números del
pollutes the
impacto del tabaco,
planet.
algunos
Here we
ejemplos
have
reales de
some of
acuerdo
the
con datos
figures
también vimos en
from
el video y también fueron
tobacco impact. They
mencionados por
were
nuestros directores
mentioned by
departamentos.
our director of
Y
our department. They were also
estos
mentioned
números
in
de
the
impacto
video.
están
And these
relacionados con el impacto
figures
en los
have to do
bosques,
with the
en el
impact
suelo,
on
en el océano
forests,
y en el
soil,
suministro de agua.
oceans, and
El tabaco
water
ha
supply.
destruido en
Tobacco
1500
has destroyed in half a
1.500
century
millones de hectáreas de
15,
bosques, principalmente en los países
1.5 billion of
tropicales.
hectares,
Los árboles tallados
a
para el
forest,
cultivo del
especially in
tabaco
tropical
representan un
countries.
5% de la
Uh,
deforestación
So
mundial.
this
A
accounts
cada
for
año
deforestation at the
desaparecen
global level. Every
aproximadamente
year,
mitad del
about a
de Cabo
size
Verde en África.
area
En
about the
Brasil y
size of
Cuba
Cape
hay áreas
Green Cape
desertificadas por causa del
disappears in
cultivo de
Africa.
tabaco.
Brazil and
Y en
Cuba have
comparación
a
a
lot of
otras actividades
desertification problems,
como
and
el
compared
cultivo
to
de
other
maíz, incluso el
activities such
pastoreo,
as
el cultivo de
corn
tabaco tiene un impacto
harvest,
mucho más destructivo en los
tobacco
ecosistemas.
cultivation has a
El
much
cultivo de
higher
tabaco está
impact on
entre los
ecosystems.
10
Tobacco
cultivos más
harvesting
requeridos
is
por
among
fertilizantes
the
y
10 crops
también no
that
podemos dejar de
use
mencionar,
most
hablando
fertilizers,
de la
and
enfermedad
also
del tabaco
contributes
verde o intoxicación de
to
nicotina que afecta hasta
nicotine
25% de los
poisoning that
cultivadores de
impacts up
tabaco.
to 25%
Muchos de
of
los
tobacco
plaguicidas
growers.
utilizados
A lot of the
son
pesticides
tóxicos
that are
para los
used are
peces y para
toxic
los
for
organismos
fish and
y
other
estudios
organisms.
a
And
investigadores han
studies and
encontrado en
researchers have
70% de
found
las aves
that
marinas y 15%
70%
de las
of
tortugas
sea
marinas
um,
colillas parcialmente digeridas.
birds and
Un solo
fish
cigarrillo
have
de
partially
tabaco
digested
consume
cigarette butts. A single
7
cigarette
litros de
uses
agua desde el cultivo
7.3,
hasta su eliminación.
3.7
Y a
liters of
cada
water
año,
and
22
throughout the
millones de
life
metros
cycle. And every
cuadrados de
year,
agua
22
son
million
utilizados
tons
en
of
la
water
producción de
are used
tabaco.
to
Y esta cantidad
produce
equivale a la
tobacco,
cantidad de
which
agua que
is
se vierte
equivalent
en el río
to
Amazonas en un día. Por
what
cada
the amount of water that flows through the Amazon River daily. And for each cigarette, we can cover the drinking needs for one individual for an entire year. Tobacco also pollutes the air and contributes to pollution. A single cigarette, in order to be produced, issues for 14 grams of CO2, and we have manufacturing plants in several countries that are manufacturing cigarettes all over the world. A single smoker throughout his life can emit up to 5 tons of CO2 throughout their life, and in the world we have over a billion smokers. Tobacco smoke contributes to increase pollution levels in the air and release GHGs both during production and consumption. And there are 4.5 billion cigarette butts that are discarded to the environment. Globally, tobacco waste, including cigarette butts and cigarette packages, are the ones that are most widely used, collected, and a single cigarette butt can contaminate up to 100 liters of water. And now we're also facing a new challenge that we cannot overlook, which are electronic devices. In general, electronic junk is an overwhelming issue, and the majority of the plastic containers for e-cigarettes are not reusable or recyclable, and they end up in ditches and waterways. This includes different parts that contain dangerous chemical substances and microplastics, which are extremely harmful for the environment and that also pollute rivers, oceans, marine life, and urban settings. But the industry oftentimes tries to present itself as an environmentally friendly and sustainable industry and launches different marketing strategies and CSR plans. These strategies are known as greenwashing, and as part of these strategies, the industry funds environmental and humanitarian projects in the tobacco producing countries, but production and consumption of these products create the impacts that I just mentioned. So these CSR actions are promotion strategies. And today in our panel, we are going to hear more information about the strategies that industry is using to do this greenwashing of their reputation and image. Like I said at the beginning of my presentation, tobacco impacts on health and the economy are well known, and starting with this global strategy, we're getting to know more about the impact tobacco has on the environment. Article 18 says that in complying with the obligations, the parties should pay attention to environmental protection and health of the people when we're talking about the environment in terms of tobacco cultivation, production of tobacco products in all of their territories. The seventh Conference of the Parties, which is the top authority invited the WHO and other international organizations to develop and report on the environmental impact tobacco products have. The idea was to provide practical guidance to help member states mitigate the environmental impact of tobacco products. This publication is currently available in English, and today or sometime during the week will also be available in Spanish. During the same conference of the party COP7, the Secretariat was asked to help parties work on sustainable development strategies aimed at making people aware of the environmental and labor dangers related to tobacco. But in addition to Article 18 in the Convention, there are other articles in the Convention that can have a key role in reducing environmental damage caused by short and long-term consequences of tobacco products. We have Article 6 about price and tax measures, because it's been proven that significantly increasing taxes reduces tobacco use, and by collecting higher prices and higher taxes, the tobacco industry must pay for the harmful
sobre medidas de prohibición total.
measures, the harmful effects it has. Article 8 has to do with protection from exposure to tobacco smoke, and also prohibiting CSR measures and therefore prohibiting tobacco advertising, promotion, and sponsorship. Then Article 14 that has to do with demand reduction measures concerning tobacco dependence and cessation. Article 17, which refers to the provision of support for economically viable alternative activities. Article 19 on liability, which has to do with holding the tobacco industry accountable for harming the environment and making workers exposed to the harmful substances. And the same goes for consumers and second-hand smokers. And finally, a very important aspect is Article 5.3, which has to do with protection from industry interference and protecting from the interest of the tobacco industry, which in terms of environmental protection would be to protect the industry from efforts by the tobacco industry to disguise the impact its business has on the environment. And now in terms of the extended producer responsibility, or EPR, which has to do with whoever pollutes pays, this principle must be applied to the tobacco industry. The industry should foot the bill for cleaning up the environment. This is consistent with Article 19 in the convention that has to do with liability. And we should also have an environmental tax levied on tobacco producers and distributors and consumers for contamination or pollution to the environment, the oceans, and other parts of the environment. As part of this UN Framework Convention, there are some other calls for action. Quitting smoking benefits health and the environment, providing support to political measures with a ban on single-use plastics, including cigarette butts and e-cigarettes, to make people aware of these greenwashing tactics employed by the tobacco industry, and providing support to governments in imposing additional taxes. And we also have to advocate for smoke-free environment to protect children, youth, and workers from exposure to direct smoke, secondhand smoke, and residual smoke. And in the region, like our director says, we have 24 out of the 35 member states of PAHO, which are completely 100% smoke-free in closed and open public spaces and workspaces. South America is 100% smoke-free. So this call for action is for other subregions to do the same and to have all 35 member states 100% tobacco smoke, free of tobacco smoke, which is part of our strategy and plan of action to strengthen tobacco control in the region of the Americas 2018-2022. It is very important to come up with this, to hold the tobacco industry accountable to foot the bill of cleaning up tobacco products from the environment, to support tobacco growers so they can adopt alternative means pursuant to Article 17 and 18 in the convention, to continue making progress in fully implementing the framework convention so that we can minimize environmental impact. Also to levy higher taxes and raise prices on tobacco products, to make progress in adopting a neutral packaging, to have more countries ratify the protocol for the elimination of tobacco products, and to have protection measures for measures aimed at preventing interference from the industry, and also to remind parties that this is one of our sustainable development goals, which is goal 3A. This is all I had to say, and now without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Rosa Sandoval, who's going to talk about the awards for World No Tobacco Day 2022.
Thank you very much, Adriana. Good morning to everyone. You heard some very impressive statistics. I invite you to look at our website to find not only that information, but also other resources. Today's topic gives us another reason to quit smoking. It's good for our health and for the environment. And the good news is that we have the answer to this in the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, as Adriana was saying. I would now like to go to the most pleasant part of today's program of World No Tobacco Day. And we work hard in our tobacco control team on this day, but we take a pause within the major challenges that we face, as Adriana was describing. But in the middle of these major challenges, we take a break to acknowledge the contribution of professionals and other people in our region who are working on tobacco control and have been doing so for decades. So this is particularly gratifying for me. And in addition, I would like to invite Dr. Thomas Novotny to play his video, and I will read the three winners today and also tell you that Professor Novotny is recognized as a trailblazer in research and advocacy around the environmental impact of tobacco, particularly regarding post-consumer waste. He is a founding member of the Cigarette Butt Pollution Project that has pioneered the effort to demonstrate the environmental harms of tobacco, focusing primarily on this banning the sale of cigarette filters. He has also been leading in the initiative to create knowledge and awareness about the role of filters as microplastics and as such contaminants. The CBPP, and particularly Professor Novotny, continue to provide expert assistance to governments, communities, organizations, and individuals on this. And he continues to provide this expert assistance to government, communities, organizations, and individuals seeking to reduce the environmental burden of cigarette butt waste, work that has an impact at the local, national, and global levels. Congratulations, Tom, on behalf of the World Health Organization, the Pan American Health Organization, for the wonderful work that you have been doing in tobacco control, and a round of virtual applause for Dr. Novotny. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Tom.
I appreciate this very much. It's a great honor.
Gracias.
El agradecimiento es para ti y ahora
The recognition is for you, and now I will continue to read about the other two prize winners in the region, and then we're going to hear more from Tom on his expertise. The second person I'd like to mention today is Violeta de Palomo. She has been a key player in the creation and sustainability of the tobacco control mobilization in her country, El Salvador. Never a smoker, she is a victim of the effects of forced exposure to tobacco smoke during her working life. In 2014, she founded Fundabla to provide health care, psychological support, speech therapy for education, health promotion, treatment, and rehabilitation, but above all, to inform the population about the risks and harms caused by tobacco use. As the coordinator of the coalition Súmate contra el Tabaco has promoted surveillance and enforcement of the tobacco control law to ensure 100% smoke-free spaces, support for smoking cessation, and advocacy for increasing taxes on tobacco products. Violeta was with us yesterday at our country office in El Salvador. As we said yesterday, we appreciate all of your contributions and work, and you inspire us tremendously. And we said yesterday, when one voice is strong, nothing can snuff it out. So we also send a round of virtual applause to Violeta in recognition of her award and accomplishments. The third prize winner is that we have one of the two prizes that the Director General of the WHO has granted to our region is to the President of the United States of Mexico, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. And he was involved in the activity at our country office in Mexico, in which we bestowed the prize on him. Through his leadership and unrestricted support for the strengthening tobacco control measures, validated and promoted the mobilization of Congresspeople that allowed, after 13 years, the unanimous approval of the reform of the general law for tobacco control, which is LGCT, in 2021. The law now complies with the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, specifically establishing 100% smoke-free environments throughout the country, and a complete ban on tobacco advertising, promotion, and sponsorship. This reform also extends to the scope of measures for smoke-free environments to include emissions from new and emerging products. The president, over the course of the last year, has personally, on multiple occasions at the highest level, reaffirmed the narrative in favor of tobacco control and therefore unequivocally prioritized the right to health of all Mexicans ahead of the interests of the tobacco industry. The president is receiving this on behalf of the Mexican people for the full implementation of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And I again invite you to join me in a virtual round of applause for the President of Mexico for this distinction. And this concludes the announcement of the 3 prize winners in our region this year, and we thank all 3 of them. And now I would like to go on to the next part of today's webinar, in which we will hear or benefit from the expertise of 2 major professionals in this area. First, we invite Dr. Thomas Novotny to talk to us about the costs of tobacco waste. You have the floor, Tom.
Muchas gracias y buenos días y buen día
Thank you
a
very
todos.
much. Good morning to everyone.
And I would like to share my screen with you now and talk a little bit about tobacco product waste and the cost of tobacco. And I will be hopefully finishing in time for this session to be completed on time. But there's a lot to say, and I wanted to talk about the human and environmental costs because these are very substantial, and yet we haven't yet come up with a good estimate of these, and I'll tell you about our research into this area as I go on. But today I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the life cycle effects on the environment relative to costs, and I'm going to focus on tobacco product waste, which is the post-consumption element of this life cycle burden, as well as the economic cost studies that we're going to be pushing forward, both here in California and as also a part of WHO's work in Geneva. And then I'll mention just a few of the ways that these costs can be reduced through environmental or tobacco control regulatory policies. And I want to emphasize how it's important that we're joining environmentalism and tobacco control advocacy in this effort. These are both powerful advocacy communities. Perhaps even the environmental community is even more vigorous in some ways than the tobacco control community, but joining together makes for even more effective advocacy. So you've seen the life cycle description of the elements of burden on the environment, from agriculture to manufacturing to tobacco use, which would include also secondhand smoke and thirdhand smoke, the residuals of smoking on indoor environments as a result of having years of exposure, the disposal of tobacco product waste and electronic waste now as well, and then more indirectly impacts on ecosystems. And all of these elements are going to generate costs. We don't know what these costs are completely, especially in this area of ecotoxicity or indirect costs or secondary costs. We're getting a good handle on what the costs are for disposal and tobacco product waste, and that's what I'll focus on a bit more. But nevertheless, throughout the life cycle, there are economic costs that one can consider in terms of the burden and the responsibility of the tobacco industry. So from the get-go, I think we all can realize that tobacco product waste is a public nuisance. You can just walk out the door of any building, in any city, in any place in the world, and see the impact of tobacco product waste on the streets. It's there as a public nuisance that should be the responsibility of the industry who produces this, rather than the responsibility of volunteers, communities, taxpayers. And none of these are sort of reimbursed adequately through whatever reasons, whatever mechanisms, whether it's taxes or fees. But what I think we also must realize is that there are more indirect or secondary effects of toxic carcinogenic chemicals, including plastics, that are polluting the environment as a result of tobacco product waste. Cigarette butts are the #1 littered item found on beaches and waterways worldwide. Every year, the International Coastal Cleanup finds that about a third of all beach litter by count is tobacco product waste, butts mostly, but now increasingly other kinds of materials as well. And urban litter audits find that about 10 to 20% of small urban litter is also cigarette butts. This is a significant component and it has a cost to it. Well, globally, we know that there are probably closer to 6 trillion cigarettes smoked each year. And as mentioned previously, maybe 4 trillion. We don't know for sure what the unknown, what the true number is, but it's going to be in the trillions or dumped somewhere each year, whether it's in landfills or waste bins or just on the street. But we also know that almost all commercial cigarettes, especially those sold in the US, but also even more than 90% globally, are filtered, mainly with the cellulose acetate filter. We have a sense of what these filters weigh. It's about 3.4 grams per a pack of 20 cigarettes, filtered cigarettes. So we can figure out what the estimated butt waste is, by weight, even though we usually refer to the cigarette count or the tobacco product waste count as a more sort of identifiable number, but there's still 49 million kilograms of butt waste dumped each year in the environment. So this doesn't include all of the other stuff, the packages, the lighters, the matches, other products, including the e-cigarettes and smokeless tobacco pouches, which are also found on urban and beach cleanups throughout the world. What we do now know is that through laboratory studies, we can identify toxicity to single cell organisms, to bacteria, to invertebrates, to fish, and all sorts of different creatures. Mostly again in the laboratory. We are still working to identify what these impacts of ecotoxicity are in the field. But we do know that even through accidental ingestion, pets and humans have consumed cigarette butts. We know this from poison center reports, as well as even veterinary poison center reports. We know some of the chemicals that are produced. These include all of the 7,000 chemicals that are in tobacco products. 50 or so of those are carcinogens, but nicotine is in of itself a hazardous, toxic, hazardous chemical. It's been used as a pesticide in the past, and many of the carcinogens, TSNAs, PAHs, as well as metals, and then of course the microplastics are part of the chemical residual of tobacco product waste. So these things are now found on studies of field studies, natural reserves on roadsides, in wastewater and drinking water supplies. And what we're also now finding, at least in the laboratory, is the potential for bioaccumulation and bioamplification in the food chain, meaning that some of these chemicals can get into lower forms of animals. They then become consumed by higher forms and get into the food chain. We don't have evidence of this affecting humans as yet, but the fact that it is potentially there and shows the potential for DNA damage is of at least some concern. So we have this potential pathways to human health risks from deposition of the tobacco product waste in the environment, whether it's on beaches or into water systems or into even plants are affected by tobacco product waste chemicals, can find its way into the human sort of exposure mechanism. We don't know about that human risk yet, but we are gaining more and more information on this as we go along. You heard about the e-cigarette waste problem. So these components are littered in the environment, especially around schools here in the United States. This is the most common item found in schoolyards from the young people who deposit these, thinking that they're something that can be dumped into the environment. There's a picture here on the right side of pods, jewel pods collected from schoolyards. And the important thing to consider here is that when schools collect these, whether they confiscate them from the students or whether they pick them up off the school grounds, they become responsible for this hazardous waste. They become responsible for training, transport, storage, and disposal, which has a cost to it. So here again, we're looking at some indirect costs that are not considered in terms of the cost of tobacco use, or at least e-cigarette use for places that have to deal with this, such as schoolyards and perhaps businesses as well. The electronic components, the lithium-ion batteries that are in electronic cigarettes are another concern. So relative to economic studies, we've had some experience on this now. Back in 1994, my colleagues and I published an article in the US CDC journal called the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. where we estimated what the yearly cost of medical care was attributable to cigarette smoking in the United States. And shortly after that, a bunch of lawyers were deputized by states' attorneys general to bring lawsuits against the tobacco industry to recover these costs paid for by the states. This ended up as something known as the Master Settlement Agreement back in 1998, which required the tobacco industry to reimburse states now at about 10 billion per year for the indefinite future for the medical care costs that they were responsible for. So this was a lesson, I think, in accountability, where if good economic data can be presented, it can actually end up in reassigning responsibility for the costs of medical care, at least, back to the tobacco industry. So we're looking at different sources of costs when it comes to tobacco product waste. And here we can think about prevention. I mean, it costs money to put laws into place and to enforce them, to publicize, to put out public relations information. We know that there are costs to surface abatement, meaning cleanups, mechanized or manual. We know that there are costs to managing the waste that ends up in stormwater. Tobacco product waste is something that can be filtered out or captured, and that's going to be required here now in California going forward. We know that there are costs to the disposal of this hazardous waste. Again, as I mentioned, whether it's electronic waste or tobacco product waste, it's considered hazardous with the chemicals that are in there. And then there are these unabated litter and waste costs that we're referring to as secondary costs, again, ecosystems damages or damages to tourism or urban quality of life issues that we don't have a good way of estimating. We can estimate the direct costs by looking at what it costs to implement litter regulations, to do code enforcement or enforce laws against littering or against smoking in public places. The cleaning costs are something we can estimate. And we can get some estimate of what the manual area cleanup costs are from volunteer time that is spent doing the beach cleanups, for instance. So all of these are data sources that we're working on right now and are hopefully going to be pushing forward in a new study that we're doing here in California. The secondary costs may end up being something known as willingness to pay, meaning what are we willing to pay to clean up and prevent widespread damage to the environment as a result of tobacco product waste or other kinds of tobacco environmental burdens. So this is pretty challenging to do, but we are working on this as an important component of secondary costs that may end up including such things as human health and occupational risks, ecological damage, land cleanup, and impacts on communities. Now, there have been some studies already on the cost of tobacco product waste cleanup. Using a litter audit in the city of San Francisco back in 2009, the city assessed the costs of cleanup as a proportion of all the waste costs that were generated in the city. And they found that it would require about 22 cents per pack to reimburse the city for the cleanup costs due to tobacco product waste in San Francisco per year. So this was assessed, and then it was, of course, the city was sued by the tobacco industry, but they were able to withstand that. As a matter of fact, the city attorney at the time was Kamala Harris, who's now our vice president, stood up for the city and defended against the tobacco industry for this assessment. Now this assessment has gone up to $1.05 per pack due to increased labor costs and inflation, which is a form of taxation, essentially, that reduces tobacco use as a result of increasing the price of cigarettes. We've done a national study of costs simulating, this is again a very econometric kind of simulation model, looking at large cities in the United States, and you can see that the mean cost of this runs from about 4 million per year to 58 million per year in New York City. Well, this is an underestimate because we really had very little basic data to work with. But nevertheless, this is an estimate of what the rock bottom probably cost is per city. And we hope to then work with WHO to develop similar models for countries throughout the world. Current mitigation policies include such things as PR campaigns and media campaigns and the cleanups, of course, waste bins placed on city corners. Banning smoking in public places, beaches, parks, restaurants, all of this is important. It denormalizes smoking. There are anti-litter laws up to $1,000 per event. There are litter fees, as I just mentioned. And there have been some ideas about take back and recycling. Well, the problem with these interventions is that the litter laws are not enforced. Smoking bans are poorly enforced. Most smokers don't know that filters are made of plastic, and yet they consider them something that's biodegradable and may just, be absorbed by the environment without concern for the plasticity of them. And then 2/3 of smokers do, in fact, admit to discarding their butts improperly on surveys and also on observational studies. So what's important is that most smokers still believe that filters protect them from smoking. But of course, the filter is made of cellulose acetate, non-biodegradable plastic. It's specifically designed to accumulate some particles and chemical toxins that then leach out into the environment. And the consideration of biodegradable filters is not a viable option. And the reason for that is that if people think that they have a biodegradable filter, they're more likely to litter that. I think the result would be that littering would actually increase as a result of having biodegradable filters, and that would not necessarily reduce the chemical toxicity or exposures. Robert Proctor is a historian at Stanford University, and he wrote a book called The Golden Holocaust, which I'd strongly recommend to you all. And he outlined the main purpose of the filter for the industry, which is to lower the cost of manufacturing, because it's actually cheaper to make a cellulose acetate part of a cigarette than it is to actually include it all just being tobacco leaf, to prevent tobacco bits from entering the mouths of smokers, and to convince people to thinking that filters are somehow safer than unfiltered brands. This is a fraud. There is no evidence to show that there are reductions in health effects. And in fact, what we have seen is something called adenocarcinoma increase in incidence. And here, it's a little hard to see all of this, but what you can see is that the increase of this particular cell type of cancer, lung cancer, has gone up for both men and women over the period of time that the filter has been present on all cigarettes, essentially since 1970. So other kinds of lung cancer cell types have gone down in incidence, but this one has gone up. And it's because against a filter, one inhales more deeply into the periphery of the lungs, and that's where the adenocarcinoma lives. So the conclusions that I'd like to make today is that, first of all, there are costs to tobacco product waste in the environment. We haven't got the solid estimate of these, but the initial estimates are going to be significant. There's blight, degradation, cleanup costs, ecotoxicity costs, and potentially human health costs. The cost of this waste is borne by communities, governments, and these are what are called negative external and negative economic externalities, and that the tobacco industry must be held accountable for all of this. They are not stakeholders in policy development, and I want to make sure that's emphasized when we consider product responsibility. They are to be regulated, and they're not part of the solution. So what we need are clear messages. Here, the Surfers Against Sewage provide me with this dramatic message from their work in the UK. There are lots of organizations now, environmental organizations, that are talking about the non-biodegradability and toxicity of butts. And of course, the plastic issue is becoming more and more important. I'll refer you to a white paper that we've just done here in California with this link that has an awful lot of information that has been compiled over the last several months to support tobacco control policy here in California. I want to thank you for this, and sorry to have to rush through it, but I hope we'll have a chance to discuss this more in the future. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Tom, por esa
Thank you very much, Tom, for that really impressive presentation. There's so much information to digest on World No Tobacco Day, and we are so PAHO is committed to continue this conversation, as you have mentioned, over the coming year. And of course, we are going to very much be looking out for the various estimates from other countries that you're working on with our PAHO colleagues. And we know that there are countries of the region that have banned smoking in outside spaces. So that is something to keep following in the region, as you have said, and to also raise public awareness about. There are 22 countries in the region who are working on this. Thank you once again, Tom. And again, congratulations for your prize this year. I now want to invite our next panelist, who is Andrew Rowell. could you please turn on your video? He's going to talk about greenwashing strategies of the tobacco industry. He is a research fellow at the University of Bath and director of the tobacco tactics team at the Tobacco Control Research Group. And at STOP, he's been writing on this topic for 25 years, including on the tobacco industry. You have the floor, Andy.
Great, thank you. Buenos dias, everyone. So yes, I'm going to talk about greenwashing the tobacco industry and hopefully sort of follow on from some of the great presentations that we've already heard from. So when we talk about greenwashing, what do we actually mean? And it was back in 1999. There was it was the first time I went into an English dictionary, and it was basically disinformation disseminated by an organization as to present an environmentally responsible public image. And that was the first time it actually sort of had a sort of a definition that went into a dictionary. So, we also, I mean, the term's been around for years. 30 years ago, at the Earth Summit in Rio, Greenpeace did a guide to greenwashing, and they gave some examples, like a leader in ozone destruction takes credit for being a leader in ozone protection. A giant oil company professes to take a precautionary approach to global warming. And, often where tobacco has led, big oil has followed, but actually in this case, where big oil has gone, tobacco has followed. And, you don't actually have to look very far to sort of see the latest greenwashing activities from the tobacco industry. So I'm just going to give you some examples very quickly. So one of the sort of classic things at the moment that the industry's doing is, if you look on, say, British American Tobacco's website, is the sort of accreditation that's going on from third parties. So BAT's been putting out videos, saying we are 20 years for being a sustainability leader. And, you've got to ask, an industry that kills 1 in 2 of its long-term users and, has the whole array of problems that we've just been hearing about, how in any way can it be described as sustainable? But I mean, if you go on the websites, there's bright colors, there's clouds, and again, if you look on the bottom right, on BAT's website at the moment, again, it's saying that it's not only a sustainability leader, but it's also a climate leader. And it's saying BAT recognized again as a climate leader by the Financial Times. So again, there's a sort of third-party accreditation, which many people believe is flawed, because I mean, we've been hearing about the huge climatic impact of the industry. And basically what is going on is that you've got a carefully crafted message to financial analysts, the media and policymakers, that this is a company that has global recognition for its commitment to people, planet, and the climate. And, it's a message that is not on its websites. This is a slide from BAT's an investor presentation. And again, sort of bragging about its ESG recognition from loads of different organizations, sustainability awards, climate awards. You would think that BAT is a cutting edge, pioneer in tackling climate change. And again, it's not the only tobacco company that is now doing it. If you log on to JTI's, Japan Tobacco's webpage, the front page right now of the company's website is talking about Destination Zero. And it says, we are accelerating our efforts to help slow global warming and reduce our contribution to climate change. And there's wind turbines and there's trees, and it's all green and it's all lovely. And again, in the sort of animation on their website, it says, since 2016, we have been recognized internationally as a leader in tackling climate change. And it says that tackling climate change not only creates long-term value for our shareholders, consumers, employers, but also the wider society. So it sees, tackling climate not only, it's basically a business opportunity, but again, this is greenwashing. And just as BAT says it's a climate leader, so does JTI say it's a climate leader. Not to be outdone, I mean, have a look at Philip Morris's, website. Again, big front and center sustainability at PMI. And lo and behold, Philip Morris is also a climate leader too, supposedly. And it says PMI has been recognized as a climate leader, and we continue working closely with our suppliers to achieve science-based targets. And not only is PMI saying it's a climate leader, but it's also saying this is a company that's going to go to net zero. And here is a target that's more than a promise, it's already in action. So again, despite the whole of the sort of life cycle ecological problems we've been hearing about, Philip Morris is saying it's going to be a net zero company. And not to be outdone, Imperial Brands, again, huge sort of front and center, hey, this is a sustainable company. And lo and behold, Imperial Brands also saying, they're a climate leader. And so all the tobacco companies are basically saying they are climate leaders. But the reality, as we've heard, and as Adriana said, is 6 trillion cigarettes basically have been shown to contribute almost 84 million tons of CO2 equivalent emissions to climate change. And one scientific study said that the tobacco industry's CO2 equivalent emissions are in the same general category with a major oil company without providing any societal benefit, raises the social question of whether such continued emissions are worth their costs in exacerbating climate change. And so we often think about big oil being, one of the main drivers of climate change, but big tobacco is too. And yet at the same time, they are trying to greenwash their image by saying they're all climate leaders. And again, we've very, some specific regional examples for you. So not only are they sort of brandishing, greenwashing all over their websites, but they also do partnerships with governments or NGOs to try and brag about their environmental image. So since 2011, BAT has been involved with the Brazilian Tobacco Growers Association, the Brazilian Institute of Environment and Ministry of Environment for the preservation of forests on the south coast of the country. And again, PMI brags that it has invested over $4 million in projects in Brazil and other countries on forest protection, reforestation, and enhancement. So they're bragging and greenwashing that they're basically for planting trees. And the reality, though, is this is another paper. It says in Brazil, where criticism of the soybean industry for its contribution to deforestation has led to a global outcry, tobacco farming ranks alongside soybeans and wheat as one of the leading causes of vegetation loss. So they greenwash about reforestation and trees, and the reality is very different. And in Mexico, PMI runs an initiative to collect lighters to stop the fire, aiming at litter cleanups and pushing smoke-free messaging to markets its heated tobacco products, high costs. And, the initiative encourages participants to collect used lighters and return them to PMI stores and other strategic points. Again, this is all greenwashing. And, as Thomas has just been talking about, e-cigarette waste is now a massive and growing problem. And again, one study suggests that, the new classes of plastics, metals, cartridges, lithium-ion batteries, and concentrated nicotine solutions used in many of the newer nicotine and tobacco electroproducts involves significantly more environmentally intensive manufacturing processes than products that are primarily made of plant material, plastic filters, and combustible cigarettes. So in conclusion, the industry is trying to argue that it's becoming sustainable. And, it's greenwashing, it's images, all over their websites, and also by going into collaboration on sort of full solution projects. But actually, not only does cigarettes cause a huge ecological problem, but there's a whole new series of ecological problems coming with e-cigarettes and heated tobacco products. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Andy.
Thank you so much, Andy, for your wonderful presentation. Very interesting how you talk about climate change. You always talk about big oil, but now we have to also think about big tobacco. Both you and Tom gave us a laundry list of things to do in order to work with policymakers and decision makers in the region. So thank you so much for bringing this information to us and opening up our eyes to these issues that are impacting the countries in our region. Now, I would like to ask Juan Castillo, Regional Advisor for PAHO, to come up with some comments, some wrap-up comments about what we just heard. And thank you once again to both of our presenters. Andy, go ahead. Thank you so much, Rosa, for the invitation. And I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate your unit on the work you're doing to fight tobacco and the impact on our health, and also include the environment as well in this. Thank you, Andy and Tom, for your presentations, which are highly relevant. And like Ross said, I'm Juan Jose Castillo, advisor on air quality and health as part of the climate change and environmental determinants for health unit at PAHO. The guiding principle for our work is the agenda for the Americas in health, environment, and climate change. And we work in 4 specific areas: air quality, climate change, chemicals, and drinking water and sanitation. And the issue that is being discussed today around tobacco is closely linked to these thematic areas of work that we have at the environmental, at my unit. And it gives us an opportunity to join efforts to address this threat, as you have very well pointed out, in terms of not only the well-known impacts on health, but also the environmental impacts as well. This year, during the World Health Day, the theme was Our Planet, Our Health. And the idea is for us to make progress in protecting health. And this, of course, includes protecting our common house, the planet. And so that's why it's so important, Rosa, to have this comprehensive approach to close the doors on this threat coming from the tobacco industry, because it's impacting both our health and the planet. And ultimately, it impacts human health through these environmental determinants for health, which expose us to more contaminants and risks for people's health. That's why at the Climate Change and Social Determinants for Health Unit, we would like to thank you for this invitation, and we celebrate this effort. We have had joint cooperations with, for example, a ban on tobacco products when they were seized as contraband. And now we have an opportunity to develop a comprehensive roadmap to see how we can work together to address this environmental and health crisis, which, like you said, not only involves focusing on big oil, but also on these activities that are impacting our environment. And this gives us an opportunity, first of all, to turn our backs to these strategies, these greenwashing strategies like we heard about, but also to be able to have better oversight processes that would enable us to advocate for people's health. So thank you so much, Rosa, and your team for this invitation. And once again, we are available to support these processes and work together with you. Thank you so much, Juan, for joining us today. And I would like to highlight one of the phrases you says, and that is protecting our common home, because the environment is our home and it needs to continue to be livable for all. Sometimes we think about protecting the environment as something that's out there, but Earth will go on, but unless we do something, it will not be able to continue to be livable for us. And that is what we need to work on. And today we get a lot of food for thought from you, from the rest of the panelists, so that we can become more familiar with the width and the breadth of the cost that tobacco products have and the impact they have on the environment and in not protecting our environment, and to be a lot more and to open our eyes to the greenwashing strategies that tobacco industry engages in. So we are not going to be able to actively engage with the 278 participants that have joined us today. However, we will continue to hold this discussion throughout the year. We will have a lot of information to continue to share with you. So with this, we have concluded today's World No Tobacco Day 2022. And once again, congratulations on those who received awards in the region of the Americas this year. Thank you again so much for joining us today. And we hope to see you soon in our next virtual activity on June 15th on healthy taxes. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day and happy World No Tobacco Day.
Venga a ver. Quiero mostrarle algo. Un producto que está destruyendo nuestro planeta. Para darle espacio, se talan millones de árboles. Para cultivarlo, se usan sustancias químicas que envenenan la tierra, el suelo y el agua. Para fabricarlo, se llena el aire de toxinas. Y cuando se elimina, contamina el medio ambiente de forma inaceptable. Cada año, el tabaco se lleva la vida de más de 8 millones de personas. Además, nos cuesta 600 millones de árboles, 200.000 hectáreas de suelo, 84 millones de toneladas de CO2, 22.000 millones de toneladas de agua. El tabaco no solo envenena a las personas, está envenenando nuestro planeta.